We're just 5 days into Deadman mode, and I've achieved my first major goal of hitting 99 Slayer. Along the way, I've killed a ton of monsters and risked getting killed to take home absolute bank. This was my first ever Deadman mode, and I also didn't swap or use any ults for any gold, but I'm not gonna lie, my luck was absolutely insane. With the boosted drop rates, black masks, tridents, and whips were dropping like wild. So for my Deadman strategy, I bring to you the Hobo Wizard. The first version of this actually started off not as a wizard, but a warrior. After hitting the final bracket, just about every Slayer location was under the constant threat of PKers, and after dying over and over again in both the Slayer Tower and the Catacombs, I knew it was time to adapt. Now, I had seen that so many people were buying the Elite Void set and discovered this was actually because it was not lost on death. This was a great option for PVMers looking to get their hands on fairly decent gear. However, I thought I'd see if the same thing applies to another untradeable, the Arclight. And so, with this legendary sword in hand, I put on the absolute most trash gear I could find and went to town on Abyssal Demons. The most expensive item in my build was the Amulet of Strength, and even my Defender only cost me 80k to repair if I died. If I somehow couldn't afford that or just didn't want to pay, a Rune Defender or even Addy were options that I had saved in my bank. And it worked! I did not lose the Arclight on death, and it even preserved any charges. It would simply be a matter of running back to my grave to loot, and if even that wasn't safe, I could just retrieve it from Death's Domain. Speaking of charges, one of the best ways I would acquire them would be barraging Necreals. Now, this is probably the biggest PK hotspot in the entire game, and dying here over and over again is what started this whole idea. So I would have to pick my moments carefully, and I had just the perfect plan: breaches. While everyone else was waking up in the middle of the night to do breaches, I'd be in the catacombs doing my task. Between the time most would spend prepping, the 15 minutes of the breach itself, and the aftermath when they'd be selling their gear, I had a very neat 30-minute window to get as much training done in a fairly safe manner, and I knew these periods were absolutely invaluable for acquiring shards and Slayer experience. But none of that even comes close to the absolute money printer I unlocked in my final form. At 93 Slayer, I finally unlocked Smoke Devils, and more importantly, their occult necklace drop. This item is so freaking good for both PVMers and PKers, and at a 1 in 128 drop rate, I knew that this was the king of money making. But just as any premium spot goes in Deadman, along with the money came the PKers. And in a multi-zone, I knew the risk was just way too high, and fighting back would not be an option. So once again, I brought out the monk robes and went to work. This time, I would also be rocking the face mask, a magic short bow, and a ring of returning to get back to the Grand Exchange. My inventory was just this. And no bruiser restores, no sharks or sea turtles, just a pittance of prayer potions, a Draymond staff, and my emergency teleport back to the safety of the gnome stronghold. 100 ancient ice sacks, which could be used anywhere in Deadman, gave me just 100 barrage casts to use at the risk of less than 50k. This may seem absurd to bring so little, but I needed to beat the PKers at their own game. I didn't just want them to get nothing, I wanted them to feel that they had wasted their time. I wanted them to get bored and give up on this location. To make this even worse, I stopped picking up just about every drop, with the exception of a few rune chain bodies that would go in the deposit box to be used to rebuy my set in the event of a death. After all, I wasn't there for rune helmets or fire battle staffs. I was there for occult necklaces, and boy did I get them. At almost 7 million a pop, these were perhaps the most lucrative item in the entire game with such a high drop rate. After 2,565 Smoke Devils, I had gotten 26 occult necklaces. I know this is very lucky, but even at rate, I would have gotten about 20. Every time I got a drop, I would stop everything I was doing and immediately get to safety to teleport out and throw in my deposit box. The only chance PKers would ever have to pry one from me was if they happened to hop into my world at the exact time an occult dropped, which didn't happen a single time, although it did get close. The strategy would only become crazier with the introduction of sigils. Since sigils are not lost on death, I knew that this would be the catalyst for an incredibly efficient farming strategy with such garbage gear. At first, I used the meticulous mage sigil to even further reduce my supplies, allowing me to go with just half the required runes I would need per run and risk even less. Eventually, I threw in the sigil of prosperity to further drops. Now, I'm not positive if this affects sigils or maybe my luck was just crazy, but it really felt like prosperity was just making sigils drop constantly. Sigils would be yet another item that, if it dropped, I would instantly teleport out. Eventually, I had a whole log of sigils, and if I ever started running out of space in the deposit box or if I didn't know what to do with my gold, I would just sell my occults and buy even more sigils like I was investing in the stock market. My first absolute major purchase was the Sigil of the Ninja. If you haven't already seen your favorite streamer use this in just about every content in the game, it brings the speed of all weapons 5 ticks or higher faster by a tick. This means that spells like the ancient magics, which cast every 5 ticks, would instead be 4 ticks. I figured I would have to use ancient staffs, but unfortunately, these are a pretty hot commodity in Deadman, and at over 500k a pop, I didn't want to give PKers any reason to come for me. So my gamble was the sigil would work even by manually casting ancients from the spellbook. Fortunately for me, this did in fact work, and armed with just a magic shortbow, my Hobo wizard was shooting out Ice Barrage at the same speed of a whip. Manual casting sure sucked, but hey, it was so worth it for the risk-free strategy. I'd eventually add aggression to the mix, one of the drops I actually got from the Smoke Devils for a further 10% damage to my barrages, and so this was my final setup: Ninja, Aggression, and Prosperity. Runs like this became incredibly efficient. With such a small run from the Grand Exchange Fairy Ring to the Smoke Devil Cave, I could get back to killing smokes in less than a minute. So banking and resupplying constantly never really felt like a chore. Another important component was the Slaughter Sigil, which let me pick my own tasks. Swapping to this between tasks and then using Konar to pick my tasks would give me 18 points, but it would cost me 30, a net loss of just 12 points per task. Smoke Devils can only be assigned at the Smoke Devil Cave, so Konar's traditional area restriction wasn't applicable here. With streak bonuses and, a few Turiel tasks here and there, I was never ever short of points and could do task after task after task. Even going to Konar to get a task wasn't an issue, as I would simply use the Sigil of Versatility to swap to Lunar's NPC contact, and boom, new task without even having to risk going to speak to her in person. I also got a ton of Brimstone keys in the process, which are still gathering dust in my bank for when I want to go turn them all in. Even dying hardly mattered, as it was just so easy to get geared again and go back out there. Deaths were speeding tickets as I smuggled necklace after necklace out of the smoke cave I came to call home. Even at a generous 100k cost per death, it would take just one occult necklace to make up 70 deaths. I collected a massive stash of monk robes, Drayman staffs, and face masks, so I could simply buy some ice sacks and head right back to my cave every time I got run up on. A special thank you to all the PKers who wouldn't even bother to grab my old robes so I could return to my grave, grab them again, and just start the cycle anew. This brought me to my final challenge, as every death would also clear the most expensive 10 stacks in your bank. I didn't care about this much at first, and simply saw it as a cost of doing business after getting rid of nearly every item of value in my bank. But this all changed when I saw my beautiful stack of face masks at risk. It's not hard to get another face mask, but dear God, I didn't want to teleport to Birtharp after every death. I couldn't let the PKers win, so I came up with yet another strategy. In the true nature of Hobo Wizard, I started to pick up just about every piece of useless junk I could find. Those mithril plate skirts and grimy lantidimes I had ignored for so long became my favorite drops. Random, worthless garbage that would bloat my bank and preserve my face mask stacks. Other players dropping half of their bank of garbage in the Grand Exchange became my drop parties, an opportunity to secure my bank with useless slots so that would be absolutely all the PKers would get when they killed me. It was perfect, even if cleaning my bank after the fact will probably be a nightmare. Now at this point you may think this is all bullshit. How am I so glee at cheating the rules of Deadman, getting so much by risking nothing? Isn't the whole point of Deadman the risk and reward? And I agree, it is a bit cheap that I'm risking so little and playing safe. However, if I only got killed every now and then, or if players got bored and would leave me alone for a while, I would get more greedy myself. I'd start bringing in Ancient Staff, which would let me autocast and train defense by defensive casting. Or maybe I'd bring some Mystic Robes for some bonus accuracy, more runes for longer trips, maybe even a Black Mask. The cost is fairly negligible for me in the grand scheme of things, and I don't mind an extra million at risk. I only played it absolutely brutally safe to discourage PKers as much as possible and waste their time. After all, they're the ones playing safe by sticking to teams of 3 or more to get their kills, so I couldn't really fight back even if I wanted to. My only option to counter their safety in numbers was to combat it with safety in gear. My final strategy was to make a deal with the devil and try to cooperate with the mafia themselves. This didn't always work, but on at least one occasion, I managed to convince the PKer to let me finish my superior monster, and in return, he could have the loot. A fair opportunity, right? Unfortunately for them, yet another PKer arrived right as I was finishing the kill. A sigil of precision had dropped, worth over 10 million. With my killer instincts after running away from players time and time again, I managed to use the small window of chaos to escape with the sigil in hand. 5 minutes later, my original PKer would also arrive at the Grand Exchange, dead and inventory empty. As a gentleman, I gave him half the cost of the precision I had managed to smuggle out, which should have been plenty to rebuy his gear set. To me, this is the beauty of Deadman and why it works and appeals to a lot of different players, even someone like myself who's not as interested in the PvP aspect. If someone wants to camp a spot and make it unusable, I'll simply bring minimal gear and waste their time. If left alone to farm, I'll bring more expensive gear and be more efficient. In turn, I risk more when I'm inevitably checked by another player. It's also important to realize that the best method is someone who can engage in both forms of content, PVM and PK. After all, I was only able to hold my spot for so long because of how few players had unlocked 93 Slayer at this point. Someone else with the required level and who was willing to risk more gear to fight me and push me off my spot would knock me over with ease, but then also be a prime target for those PKers. It's a cycle of life, so to speak. There's always a bigger fish, and the absolute biggest fish are countered by decomposers like my Hobo wizard. Thank you all so much for watching. Deadman has been an absolute ton of fun, and I hope you're all enjoying it yourself. If you like this video, please let me know below. It's been really fun to make, and I hope you guys all well. I have a leagues video coming up soon that I've been working on before I lost a week to this. And yeah, have fun. See you guys.